Yeah, dude. So if you don't mind letting everybody know, like, who you are and what you've been up to.
Uh, Tony Garcia. Well, I I helped like create the original EverQuest. I was like one of the final original people they brought on when they realized there weren't enough rusty daggers to award people. And then I went and worked on EverQuest 2 and helped with a lot of other Quest projects. And so I know I've been around EverQuest for a while, and then I did some games after and helped the TV show Defiance after that too.
Yeah, I was looking at that.
And yeah, that was a terrible experience.
And then after that,
After that, um, I went and worked on with Brad McQuaid on the initial creation of Pantheon, not whatever it is now, because we've most of the people who started that we all left. Um, and then after that, it was just things were getting so expensive, and it was hard to. I didn't want to leave California because I have a lot of roots here and
mm,
side businesses. So I found a regular job here just to handle like insurance because insurance out here is crazy trying to pay your own insurance. And just been out of games really right now. And I've done things on the side, like I know I things like I helped a small toy company create backgrounds and web comics and things like that on the side to keep my creativity going, but nothing compared to when I worked on games.
yeah, yeah. The
Matter
so
of fact, I was not to cut you off,
no,
but
go
I
ahead.
was just thinking about games the other day. Me and my daughter, we play like my daughter's 10 and she plays
Okay.
Fortnite, and I started playing with her, and she kicks my butt because you remember we used to play. We started out old school. We would play like Battlefield 1942 and at Sony, and we were great back then. We were good if FPS players, but nowadays my daughter's only 10 and she kicks my ass playing that. But playing when you play those games, you can see how being a dev, you can see how they created everything and what they're trying to test out. And but mostly when I see games now, I see how much freedom we had when we were on Sony. I mean, I talked to other former devs too about it. Like we were capable of throwing in things into a game overnight. It was amazing the freedom that we had back then.
Yeah, yeah. It's that actually has come up a good bit in some of the other conversations as well, and it's been a topic on my mind, reflecting back on my time because I got there sort of after the fact. When I got there, you were on EQ2 already, I believe, but I was still working that same tool set, and we kind of had that same ability to just if we wanted to do it, we could do it, and it was pretty fast to implement. So it's been something that's been on my
Yeah,
mind for a long time.
we still had to follow, all our pipelines for testing and everything. But compared to what I hear from devs nowadays, and I have some friends who work in Sweden on for Ubisoft,
Hmm.
and I almost moved there, and
It's not a bad spot.
they're just like, no, not at all, because they flew me out there to for an interview, and I was like, wow, this is great. Other than it being kind of cold, but it was the things they were working on. It's just like there's so many. Their pipelines are so different. Like there's so the freedom as a game designer for somebody at SOE, it you could do so much more. And then, but now it seemed like in other companies, like you're so everything's compartmentalized, and
Mm.
your job is a little bit more narrow.
Yeah, that's something. It's something that we've talked about a bit, and I'm noticing as well. Because as a sort of as a byproduct of starting this stream last year, we started working on a very sort of old school indie MMO, and the idea is to basically take it back to very stripped down tools, and because it's only a few of us, everybody's doing a little bit of everything, and it's interesting to just be able to be back in a scenario where there is that everybody chiming in, everybody working on stuff. And the second, it was funny. Speaking of which, I was, hey, Hamad just came in the chat. I was just about to say, Hamad wrote up this really great like zone breakdown and this lore and all this stuff. And by the time I talked to Nick, one of the other guys on the team, like by the time I talked to him about it, I looked in the database and he had already implemented like half of it. Right? It's just like boom. So it's trying to capture that old feel. Um, Speaking of old, like the old EQ team, like the years before I got there, are just sort of like they're nothing I can honestly speak to, and people always have questions about like where did this lore come from, and what about these quests and all of this other stuff. And so, without a doubt, I want to sort of pick your brain and memory banks on that, the back in the day on EQ.
Sure. What do you
So,
want to know?
what
You
do I
want to
want
know
to
where
know?
everybody came from, or
Yeah, I mean, what would be the most notable stuff that people in chat and people watching the video would know of yours? And I made an assumption. I could have sworn that like this area had something to do with you. I don't know. Like lore wise, am I off base or
oh, Iron Toe,
yeah.
the Tumpies?
Hmm.
Well, no, it's not exactly. Well, Iron Toe is definitely it's become like a close attachment of mine, but um, it's even my license plate.
Yeah, that's what I was wondering.
It's been that way since EverQuest. But it was either that or Caladeem, so I chose Iron Toe. But um, that was when when it was a small little the original dev team. Where I'm not sure when you exactly came on, but I remember when I first came on, like the the game world itself, the test world was just it just went out to like South Corona, and it was like, oh my god, it just seemed so expansive and vast. It seemed big then, but that's pretty much how big it was at the time. And we would have our little group of uh, some of the developers would have a little group of dwarves, and we would all be Iron Toes. And so it was just and it ended up being a small little guild that was just a certain amount of Iron Toes that were devs,
Hmm.
and everybody rhymed with Tumpy. Tumpy was an NPC, so he owned the bar. So like RPG wise, we were all related to him, and we're all like hang out at Tumpy's. When we were online, we'd try and hang out at Tumpy's, but we'd be all over the place. Usually just dying and befallen, actually.
So, what were some of the things that you'd worked on, or what was your area of focus when you were on?
A lot of population and trying to put in the quests, which was back then it was all about trying just to trying to learn what works best. And it was really hard because at the time we're trying to also push everything out on to get it out on time.
Right.
So there was a lot of failures. And um, even with like treasure tables, like I always joke about the rusty daggers. And it sucks that most people got rusty daggers thanks to Roger Houston throwing in those treasure tables.
Yeah.
But it was just mostly quest, expansive lore, and some populations like around Blackborough and a lot of the city populations.
How did you guys handle things like lore and zone designs? Was it one person would kind of own a zone? When I got on, so to clarify your question in terms of when I got on, I was doing apprentice work right around Lucklin, or as Lucklin was kicking off. I was kind of an apprentice to an apprentice while I was in customer service, and then I wound up getting pulled on full time for Lucklin, and so did some zone work and a lot of population work for folks, and a few fights and things like that. But it was during that era. So, and during that area, it seemed like each designer kind of owned a couple of zones or 3 or 4 zones, and they did everything for it. What was it like when you were there?
We were all over the place for the most part. I know I was everywhere just with populations and quests, and it wasn't until like after launch that things started to get some kind of like uh, everybody get a little bit more ownership to places.
Right.
Other than the actual creations of the zones themselves, like the physical, the geometry, all of that was the world building was done. There were people who had total responsibility. I mean, I don't know if you remember, like Mike Hutchins. Do you remember him?
Yeah, I
He
do.
was he was in charge of he was in charge of Neriac. Neriac was all his, and I'm sure you remember Sabrina Fox, who
Hmm.
she did like Rivervale. So people had their zones and added their little touches to them. Sometimes it's really hard when you're trying to go and put in lore because you're trying to make they'll put in things that don't really have a meaning or anything, and you don't really always have to give everything a meaning, but um, if you can, it's pretty, it'll help in the long run.
Yeah.
So, but everybody had the when it comes to zones, there was a single person who was building the geometry.
Yeah, I remember. It's funny. I just had a chat, like Friday night or some night last week. I hadn't talked to Daniel McGibbon in forever, and so just caught up with him, chatted like offline, just because man, it'd been forever since we talked, and yeah, we were kind of going through the cast of people who were there working on things because we're always trying to figure out who worked on what. And I remember Sabrina being there and Vu working on stuff. Um, Trying to think who else. I'm drawing a little bit of a blank at the moment. But it's interesting because we talk about the old zones and how much
Kevin Burns
character.
and
Oh yeah, Burns.
Kevin Burns and his nice cat room that everybody used to get locked into. I'm sure you've seen that online.
We even made it. I've got an emote. If you look in chat, that's the cat. I talked to Kevin pretty early on, like when we started kicking off our little indie project, to see what he was doing as well. And it was fun catching up with him. Yeah, because it's interesting. One of the things that we look at is just how much character the old zones have, and honestly, there's so much like asymmetry and weird stuff, and it kind of feels really cool now that we reflect back on it. How big was the design team at that time?
Hmm. Trying to think. maybe about 50 people, if a little more over that.
The overall team or design team?
The design team, well, it's since everybody kind of shared roles on some things, I mean, it kind of, when it comes down to lore design, if you wanted to say something like under Bill Trost, it would be probably, I don't know, five.
And were you part? You're part of that team, or
Yeah.
and so you worked? you worked up to launch, and then you were on Kunark as well, right? And Velius, or did you go to EQ2 by
Yeah,
then?
Kunark. When Velia started, we started to have a little started to work with them a little, but then Brad wanted everybody just to go over to start working on EQ2 because we had these endless meetings, offsite meetings about EQ2 that seemed to go on forever. So we were all stuck on doing that while they were. And I think Valius was a good thing because I think like when you're the request you're working on, I love that when we left that things were getting organized. You guys had like incredible pipelines, and I mean to be able to crank out the amount of expansions like every year you need. I mean, you guys had it streamlined, so I was in awe of that. So I wish I was a part of that in some ways, even when I was working on EverQuest 2, because at times it could be so chaotic on EverQuest 2. And that's just pre-production before we even started making anything.
Yeah, it's interesting. That was one of the topics that Mac and I wound up talking about the other night, was just like the pipeline and pipeline refinement. But then on top of that was that feeling that we always had, and it's funny. Um, there was this feeling on EQ at the time that while our processes were getting better and we were really just good at hitting our dates and sort of putting out a ton of content, because we were the old EverQuest, and there was so much like, I think the industry didn't realize that these games would last as long as they would, and there's so much, I think, just riding on like the new games like Star Wars Galaxies and EQ2 and all that. We always felt kind of like the redheaded stepchild in the back. It's like, oh man, no one cares about us. But looking back on that period, I think we may have lucked out because since we weren't under the eye of Sauron or anything, we could kind of make all the changes we needed to make and kind of push and go in a direction that we wanted to at the time. Kunark, uh, are there notable things that you worked on during that period that, I mean, everybody seems to have Kunark questions. Do you remember any of the stuff that you worked on, or?
On Kunark, I touched on city populations, and um, there was already a design document because they already sort of planned
Hmm.
Kunark when they were coming out with EverQuest. So that was already kind of out there. But I expanded on that lore and did mostly questing and population like I did before. But lore got more, I don't know, it got more important as we got into Kunark.
Hmm.
Um, so it was a lot more work than it was previously. Because on EverQuest 2 on its initial launch, it was just like, hurry up, get this done. The deadline's coming up. So it was just like, right, whatever you can do, just do it. Help out here and there. So we were getting to a point where they were starting to pick up their roles.
Hmm.
But I think the thing I love a lot about Kunark was I love how it was so layered when they first came out with it. Like it had the Shissar thing in the back. It was like it had this ancient history that was definitely layered. Like if you started digging, I'm sure you'd find all the Shissar stuff, and then here comes the the XR, and even they themselves had like a layered history.
Mm-hmm.
So it was pretty cool that you get to play with and that was already set in the original design document. It was much more than the original design document of the one that Bill Trust made for EverQuest. I mean, the original EverQuest, because that was just kind of like a bare bones thing. I'm sure everybody's seen that because it ends up online all the time.
Yeah, I don't. I know people have alluded to it. I don't know how many people have actually seen it. It's interesting the background on Kunark. We had Kevin McPherson on, and he was mentioning that it was like a thing he had whipped up, and it wound up sitting in a drawer. And then when the time came, that provided like a good foundation for Kunark. And given the popularity of Kunark, there are tons of questions. Um, the the lore, as you mentioned, like people have like an astounding understanding of the lore. They dig so deep into the lore. There are people that I've met, while streaming, Bobby Bick, Zaid, Level Up Larry, like these other streamers that really dig into it, and the breakdowns are. It's funny. I look at it, I was like, I wish we had these breakdowns back when I was working on EQ. It would have been nice to know all of that. So yeah, I don't know how much of that you've seen, but it's definitely appreciated. All right, you just answered in chat. So there was a question in chat about Mayong. Kinster said, I can't think of any character in EQ with more folklore built around him. Was Mayong ever intended to be a greater part of the story? Was he always intended to be more mysterious like other characters like Miracle or Alcabor? And Tony responded with, I don't know, do you want to read it out?
I will just say what I was mostly intending to say, which was um, Mayang initially was intended to have, like, if you looked, he had kind of, you would find like, oh, he has kind of a connection, or he'll may pop up in every secret in Norath. So he was definitely interested in everything, but he wasn't the mastermind behind a lot of things, but he seemed to have knowledge of everything going on. Um, but he wasn't supposed to be like some big villain who's got a hand at play everywhere. But he was definitely supposed to be a really ancient character, and he's also was Bill Trost's main D&D character. Mine was Sir Lucan,
I was about to ask.
the Freeport Lucan.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that was pretty cool having Lucan in there, because eventually he gets voiced by Christopher Lee. So it's like my old D&D character gets that I rolled up ages ago in high school, over like 32 ounce Cokes and burgers from the mini mart, eventually gets voiced by the legendary Christopher Lee. That's like, I can't even imagine that.
Yeah. You probably weren't thinking that at the time, right?
No.
I'm going to scroll up. There's some other questions in chat that I missed, but let's see. Do you know anything about the UFO in Kanos?
You mean that's just a mystery that uh, Bill was put in there. Sometimes Bill will throw in things that he likes to put in things without meaning, just to make you question and not ever answer.
I
Um,
appreciate that.
but having a flying saucer for him, because if you look, everything about him, if you look closer, kind of reeks of like he's some kind of alien or something. So you just wanted to pose that and see what people come up with, but not really answer it.
Cool. The
I see somebody asked, was Lucan an anti-paladin? Lucan was a cavalier when I rolled him up, because he was originally like the cavalier Originally, I remember we used to you remember Dragon Magazine? We used to
Mhm.
get that all the time, and the Cavalier came out there first, and then we're like, "Oh, let's make a character for this." So I did, and that's what he was initially at first. He was, but it worked better in EverQuest that he played this fallen paladin, and, um, because Cavalier, who's gonna remember that
Right.
unless you watch the D&D
Cartoon?
animated series?
Yeah.
Yes, that might be my Halloween costume this year.
Nice. Yeah. How much D&D did you guys play back then?
Oh my god, we had just tons of D&D because we initially got into it, like, when it first came out. When it first I'm sure you're familiar when it first came out, it was just like a little tiny white box with 3 little booklets in
Mhm.
it, and we would just hear about it from like, there'd be things in books about the game, like, some of them negative, and some of them were just reports on, here's this game that takes you to other worlds that you role play." So we finally found it at this place called the Hobby Chest at Oceanside, and we just dove right into it, and it was amazing. It was like, 'cause you really got it was, you just totally got lost in the worlds, and we would play, like, all night long, like, and those were I can't even do that now being an adult and with a family. You can't r When am I gonna have time to play all night long? Never. I'll fall asleep after, like, an hour. But we would play all night long, get up, fall asleep, and then it'd be the weekend, so we'd play again the next night.
Mhm.
But we played a lot of the original adventures, and there were some great adventures modules that I remember playing, and some of the offbeat ones were really great. Have you ever heard of Expedition of the Barrier Peaks?
It does not immediately come up, no. Let me see if
Oh
I
my
can.
god, you got to go look it up.
Okay.
It's like such an amazing module because for a D&D world, I don't even know if I should tell you what it is, but I'm sure if there's anybody here, they probably know what I'm talking about.
Don't.
But go out and research it.
Okay.
It's one of the offbeat ones that you need to check out,
It's got
even
an
if you're not
amazing
playing it,
cover.
just to read it.
I'll definitely read through it. It's got an amazing cover. I'll leave that up over there because I've been digging into a lot of the old modules and stuff. There's something about that old feel, and I spent a lot of time trying to decipher whether or not it's just personal nostalgia or if there's something different in the style or what. But one of the things I'm real focused on right now is like trying to go back and whether it be the books or modules or music or whatever, trying to pull all the inspiration I can to see if there's some way to recreate that feeling that, I had, or maybe, we had during that period where you would play all night and you'd wake up next day and you're still like thinking about these worlds and all the shit that like sort of triggers that emotion and sort of has your mind off in that other space. And it's like, even between sessions, you're talking about what happened in the last session. And it's like, there's something there. And I know it exists because if you look at things like Stranger Things or ET or whatever, when you see media that's tapped into the zeitgeist, they're able to do it. And maybe it only triggers something for, people our age. But given the popularity of all of that, I think there's something there, right? So yeah, thank you for the recommendation. I'll definitely read through that. Um,
That's definitely something that's missing. You're right. So I try and find that in video games I play, and that's one of the things I think I liked about when EverQuest came out because it had that same feel where it was a huge world, and you had to really. It was a dangerous world, and um, you really had to respect the world itself because there's a lot out there that could kill you. So just just trying to get from one place to another wasn't an easy task. Unfortunately, like right after that, then it becomes like all the games become like I'm there not to, for this amazing world that I'm looking at, and it's more about just rewards. Not that that's a bad thing, but it's
Sure.
definitely different than like when I'm playing D&D for this experience.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And it's weird too because um and again it may just be nostalgia or familiarity with EQ. EQ's fantasy also feels more closely related or linked to that era of fantasy um, than a lot of the other stuff I've seen necessarily. So, um, let's see. I see you typing. Yeah, Monty's in there. Um, so Keebs asked, how much did the symbology placed in zones like Black Pearl, Soleil, Neriac really play in lore, or was it just zone art? Like, how much of that was just the artist freestyling versus being pretty well established?
In what, EQ2 or what? What
EQ
are we
in the
talking
original
about?
EQ.
A lot of the art was like, as artists were building, they'd throw things in themselves. So, um, like the cool alien in Black Burrow on the wall,
Mm,
stuff like that is, or Scott Mc, Scott McDaniel. I think he tried to put a lot of like lore that was, and I would always pick his brain, especially even after I left, I would pick his brain about that. There would be things he would put in that did kind of connect,
mm,
but he was the only one who knew. So it was like, Scott, I need to know what all this means so we can pass it on to other people. Like when you're going up that huge ramp up, the one that goes up to High Pass from Karanas to the High
yeah,
Pass, that really long, and then along the cliffs, there are like there's like some uh, etchings and things like that.
yeah.
It's like he did all that and he knew what it was, so it was like um, but then he didn't remember either, so it was like lost to time what the actual connection was. Um, but in some cases, trying to give them purpose, I tried to do that later on, and especially with like things in Neriac were names and runes on the wall on the that are all over. Eventually, I gave them all a meaning.
Okay.
Um, because when I left Sony, I had like a whole crapload of I had what people always called a tome, but it's actually a digital tome, and it just had tons of stuff in it that of information that I could compile from original devs to things that I created or things that I when I found out didn't have a purpose, giving them purpose.
Mm.
Um, I don't even know what happened to that stuff. I wish I would have snuck out with it though.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, hindsight, that I probably would have saved like every email, everything, because so many people have questions. I just can't answer it. Um, like, was there lore around the fire pots in Timor's Deep that teleport you to any city?
That was there was an intended purpose for that teleportation to by the pots to happen, and it never transpired. I don't really know why it never did. And it also that came about without mine. I didn't know anything about it until after the fact. Um, and it had some lore, but like the other things, sometimes lore was created by somebody and then they never told anybody, and then it was just lost. So, but I know it was intended to be. It was intended to be a portal.
um, why was there a chessboard in Butcher Block?
That was, I think, from what I remember, it was um just one of those things they threw in to make it look like there were larger gods that would come down and play chess. Uh, but other than that, it was just one of those things that was thrown in to make you think.
Hmm. So when you got on the EQ2, was it was there like a more purposeful? Did you try to take some of the stuff that you remembered people putting in or you put into EQ1 and then and make a conscious like tie between those games by mirroring that or blowing the lore out more? Or,
Yeah, at that time, I was definitely wanting to, if not me, somebody. Well, I always, because you at that time you can see the franchise was really growing, so it
mm,
became important that we start looking at the lore and really, you know, kind of creating a cohesive record of all of these things. Because right now, I know I'm sure you remember there was a time period when there were so many EQ projects that popped up, um, and each one had people that were creating lore, and they would just get initially they would ask you questions like, um, "Oh, does this sound good? This sound good?" And then they would walk away, and then they would just start creating. But I always feel there should have been we needed somebody who was just keeping track of all this.
yeah,
You know, like in Star Wars, you can't just create something and then sooner or later it's not going to mash up.
right.
Uh, and I think we're there during that period of time. There were so many EQ projects going on that were being rushed that nobody really had that. But in EQ2, that was about the time that I was hoping to like, because EQ2 was supposed to be here's the future, not the future of gaming, but the future. It's the future of Norath. Um, but then when the limitations as far as art and how much world we're building were, you once we found out that's not gonna, it's not gonna all be the same. Mm, that's when they split. You remember the time and when they split and they said, "Oh, there's a split in here's EQ2 is like another. It's like a some multiverse. It's another
Another
timeline
reality.
that branched off of the main timeline."
Yeah,
And I hated that because it was like if we all worked together, there would be some really cool things that we could do if we just worked together as like well, one whole company. But as you say, at times, not between the two teams, but at times above them, I feel like they were just there were people higher up who just saw there are two different projects, and like you were saying, you felt like yeah, uh, redheaded stepchild for EverQuest. They all just, they should have respected the whole thing, and we could have done some like just incredible, amazing things with EQ and EQ2 to help them like live off of each other. Which
yeah.
they are really. They should.
Was and I mean, do you think it was just a byproduct of everything moving so fast at the time, or
Oh heck yeah!
yeah?
Just the amount of you saw how successful like the company got
Hmm.
in a short amount of time. Um, because we were just when I went on there, we were just they just left. Oh no, when I went on there, they were still part of 989, but soon after that, they left to form Variant. Because I remember when they were forming Variant, they were. I remember the meeting when we went into the office and they're like trying to figure out what are we going to call ourselves because they're looking for a really good name and like Brad put a whole bunch of words on the board and he's like, "Come on, let's pick one of these names." And there were like Far Journey, I remember was one of the names. And then what was the one that well, we were something for a short period of time, and Kevin Burns made a really cool logo for it. I forget what the hell. Oh, I think it was Red Eye. I think it was Red Eye Studios, and then we ended up with Variant because it was like a word that we can get. We can get the domain easily, and um, so we ended up with Variant. And then, but that was a small. When I went on there, it was small. We were just like in a right next to Carl Strauss Brewery in a small little building, not even the whole building, just one floor. And then soon after that, the launch, we ended up over there on Terman Court. And what they ended up having, like they had like three huge buildings over there. And
Yeah.
to see the pictures now of Terman Court, where it's just not even they knocked all those buildings down and came. Now it's just something totally different. It's really weird.
Yeah, because I
But
thought
for a
they
while,
grew
that
beyond
company
even
was
that
just
at some
big.
point.
But
I thought it was like even more than the three. I thought they owned like the whole cul-de-sac at some point after I
oh, and
left.
then they had the other studios, like the one in um, they had a network studio for the network in I think it was like in Austin or something like
Yeah,
that.
so
And
I
then
wound
they
up getting
had
recruited to that one. I
the
wound up,
guys working on the spy game up north, right?
yeah, that was in Seattle. So there was SOE Austin. I wound up going out there in 2006 to work on DC Universe. There was a studio in Denver. There's a studio in Seattle. We had a joint venture with a company in Taiwan, a company called Gamania. And I thought there was like I thought at one point there was like 7 studios. Yeah, it was huge.
Yeah, but you can see how stretched out that was. And you can
Yeah.
also see how much money must have been coming in because
Yeah.
it's just those three buildings alone were just like way that's just like a lot of money there. And then you got all these other projects going on, and some of them are sad because there be projects popping up that are like, oh, that sounds cool. I hope we can come out with that. And most of them like would not come out. But I remember having fun with some of the ones that did come out, like Planet Side. I
I was
love
I was about to
initially
say
when we used to play that.
St. Louis studio. There's no unforgivable that I forgot the St. Louis studio. Yep. Planetside. And then they eventually
Yeah, that
moved
was always
to San
fun.
Diego.
Yeah, I haven't even tried the one that was out now, but I guess people have fun with it. But
Mhm.
those were the days when it was fun because we would all working at SOE. You know how it was. It was like you lived there more than you were home.
Yeah.
And even if you had some time off, if we all got off around the same time in the middle of the night, we would all jump on something like PlanetSide and start playing. Because it's rare that at least for the group I was in, that it was rare that we would say, "Oh, let's play EverQuest," because it was like, "Well, I just got through working on this all day long. Can I shoot something?"
Right. Yeah, we played a lot of what was it, Quake? Maybe we played a lot of Quake in customer service when I first got there. Or no,
Oh
Unreal,
yeah, customer
Unreal.
service. Yeah, it's quite unreal.
Yeah. Yeah. So,
How was it like in customer service? You guys were I know you guys must at times were a lot of people from customer service like yourself ended up working as devs though.
mhm.
So that was a good thing I think about SOE was that you get into customer service, they definitely you can see your strengths and see your talent, and then you totally move over.
Yeah,
But
it
customer
was
service is I don't know how you could work that looked like a job I would not want.
It was it was a tough job, but like you said, it was an opportunity that was super cool to be, because so many of us in customer service were just fans. We played EQ when it came out, lost our minds, moved to California. Everybody had the pilgrimage to California. right? Showed up in San Diego. You had people in customer service sleeping in tents in people's yards to, you know, just because it was your chance to get a foot in the door. And it was so funny, man. Like, we were terrified to like screw things up while we're in customer service, because if it would suck to like get your foot in the door and get fired and not get your chance to like be a part of this rad company or become a designer or artist or whatever. And then we'd see you guys, right, the team, the development team, and it was always like this starstruck kind of moment of like, oh, those are developers. Those, oh man, can't talk to those guys, you know, like, oh, one day.
And we're all really, it's so stupid because we're all the same nerd when you
Yeah.
get down to it, especially back then. So it's like, although I was never the Magic nerd, so I didn't play a lot of Magic, and that was one way into Brad McQuaid's heart, was that if you love Magic, you know, you can get close, you become really close to Brad because that was his game. And I think I played Magic like twice in my lifetime, and I won both times, and I decided to just go out a winner and never play again.
Yeah. It's funny. I honestly, during that period, I had no time to do anything other than it was like work, customer service, play EverQuest, um, do apprentice or do work for apprentices to try to learn the tools and social engineer my way onto the team, basically. So it's like there's so many games that came out during the you know, a few years that I worked on EQ where people are like, "Did you play?" I'm like, "Probably not." I was, you know, spending all weekend raiding and then trying to get home after work in time for a raid. Usually somebody would log me in and get me to where I need to be. And then you're working like you guys, I'm sure, you know, like you said, we were working really crazy hours. I don't think I remember anything less than 12 or 14-hour day, and unless we were wrapping up an expansion and kind of in cooldown mode.
Yeah, definitely. Being working at Sony was like, um, I don't think I ever used a vacation day because you know how it is. Because then, even when you're done with a project, you get comp time. So it's like, who uses a vacation day? It's just like you never ever used it. And it's like I didn't cash that out when I left to go to um, uh, the Defiance project, and there was like so so much money from the vacation. It was like I hit the lotto
Dude, I
because I never
know.
used it. You never use it. You never had the time to use it. And then when you had time, you had enough comp time that you just used
Exactly. I had 440 hours when I got laid off. So,
that. What were they doing at that time?
um, I just wrapped up DC Universe. We'd shipped that in like I don't know, a couple months after ship. A third of the studio or so got laid off, and so got severance, got all those hours. That was nice. And honestly, at that point, getting laid off was nice as well. It was time to move on and do something more reasonable. Those were some long days.
You know, one thing that always puzzled me about DC that I should ask you is, what did you guys work with, or what did you think about, um, like your secret identities? Was there ever a time that you guys were going to put something like that in?
Yeah, and so we were gonna do a big secret identity thing, but just getting the core content, it was turning out to be like to try to put a layer of that within the game. It just wasn't gonna happen. So we wound up coming up with a pretty cool idea. We hired really talented designer. I think she's got a like her and her husband have like a small company now doing apps and stuff. And we brought her in, and they actually developed a really good pitch, and I think started working on essentially a web. It was going to be a web client where there's this whole sort of web game that was your secret identity that then linked into things that you could do offline basically as your secret identity that then tied into your actual like character and character advancement. And then over time we were going to slowly work some of that secret identity stuff back into the main game was the plan. And then over time, once we sort of got out of like, hey, we have all the time in the world to, you know, make this game, like 3.5, 4 years into development, it was like everybody just focus on slamming out the core game and get this thing done. And so it just sort of went poof.
Yeah, there's plenty of that stuff. I know how that is when you get these amazing features but they touch on so much of the game that you can't just throw the idea in there without um but letting features go sucks so much, but everybody's got their time limits.
Yeah, I mean, the cool thing about working on MMOs, what I found is it's like, all right, if we can just get out the door and get momentum, then that big list, that big backlog of cool ideas. If I mean, look at EverQuest now. EverQuest is what did it just have its 25th, 26th expansion. You know, it's gone on for a couple decades, and so in theory, with a little bit more hindsight, the way I'd approach it and the way I've approached, you know, production on MMO since then is just sort of keeping that in mind and going, how do we actually want to prioritize this as part of our live content rollout and feature release after we go live? That way, it doesn't feel like it's binary, like it has to go in for launch or it's cut. Let's see. I'm gonna scroll up because there's a question about the Kanos Bards Guild werewolf connection.
I've heard about that, but I don't even know about that myself because I remember asking about that before and I never got a really good answer about that when I was there. So it would, like I said, especially when it comes to like dialogue
Mhm.
back then, I mean, anybody could add dialogue to anything really easy. And we used to, every dev used to love to just attach things that they would say. Um, there's no doubt that there was probably somebody thinking of something along that lines from what I heard, but I can't even remember. I'll ask Bill Trosta when I see him again if he knows anything about it. But it sounds like a Kevin Burns thing. I should probably ask him.
That'd be
But
awesome.
it's one of those things that I'll find out and I'll let you know.
That would be
But I don't know
amazing.
myself.
Yeah, anything you can dig up. And I spoke with Kevin. He was like, well, Kevin said he might be willing to come on stream if it was like the bunch of you. So if you could work that magic, I would owe you whatever you want. I'd owe you
I
something.
could I could do that because I've already talked to him about that and because he should. I was on after him, and he was there for a long time. So he knows so much about, especially the art side, which is
Hmm.
that would be amazing to hear. Uh, but I'll definitely talk to him.
That'd be
If
huge, man.
anything, him and I haven't seen him in a while, anyways. So I'd love to talk to him. Uh, but I'll get with him and I'll talk to him, and I'm sure we can make it happen.
That would be so sick. Because Kevin's always been such a nice guy, like so rad. I would love to be able to ask him questions and have folks here ask him questions. And I know he worked on a ton. The the earlier questions, sort of going through your timeline a little bit more, if you don't mind. Like when you got on the EQ2, was it fairly structured at that point, or was it like you working with Trost and coming up with the lore, or what was that like?
Yeah, we were at that point. I was put in charge of the lore. And I during that time, that's when I was trying to work with you guys on EQ1, where maybe there should be. I kept trying to get somebody. I know that I was working for lore primarily in EQ, and I know it touched on all games because people kept coming to me to ask me for answers. So I wanted to get with EQ, and I thought you guys should we should work together really strong closely with the lore. Um, because I became at that time I started becoming a lore guru because I was getting all this information filtering in, and I was started recording it, and then as well as like creating a lot more of it, expanding on it. And I even created a universal timeline that for every EQ project, you really had to I really had to nudge some things too, but it put all the projects in one timeline. That's one thing I wish I had because it showed all the different milestones, um, events, and for every project into so that everything connected. Um, but I ended up becoming a lore guru at that time. The I think the problem on our side became that our problem when we started having any kind of problems with trying to um, now I'm getting off topic, but I want to say this anyways. On our problem, on our problem on EQ2 was that we were pushing the envelope, like they were saying, we're going to have this realistic art style, but that bleeding edge art style was like slowing us down because
Mm.
it was like they kept experimenting with things, and eventually art was the one dictating everything um on our schedule. So it became unbalanced because one team had not project, but the art team, maybe their managers probably had a little more pull than ours on the design side. Um, because I heard you guys probably have the opposite on EQ. You as design had pretty much the control on EQ. But
Yeah,
then you guys, it worked for you because the pipelines, like I said, you had some of the greatest pipelines.
yeah, we got lucky, I think, because the producer's office, when we got the producer's office was right there in the design pit. And so then essentially when we're staying late or whatever, and he's staying late, he'd come out, there'd be a handful of us still there, and then we were able to like just, establish that connection and then use that to I think I will say that yeah, design had a tendency to drive things there. Um, Looking back, as a
Not like that's a bad thing. I
no, no,
think it's
no.
better, I think, that design does because you are in design, you're pretty much creating the blueprint. So it's
Y-
better than it was for us because for us, art was dictating what was going on. And I think the larger part, the I guess the really large part of that for us on EQ2 was that because they were going bleeding edge, they looked for they looked for their artists managers outside of the company.
mm,
So when those people came in, they had no idea what they knew what they wanted, but they didn't know what the game was itself. And I think that's the good thing about like a lot of the artists on original EverQuest. I mean, they know the game. All these new people didn't know the game because I started to see this when they would start building our zones on EQ2. It was just like, do you guys even play the game? It doesn't. You want it to look like something people
right,
remember.
right.
And we used to try and push for them to actually get into the game, play these zones, look at these zones. We want people to, if EverQuest players popped onto EverQuest 2, they would look at the zone and say, oh my God, yeah, this is the same place. But a lot of that never happened. And that used to upset me so much. But that was because we were bringing in so many new artists. A lot of them were good, but they still should. I feel like they should have known the game that they were creating as a player.
Mm. Yeah, that's always tough. I was thinking about that as part of even just sort of thinking of that topic of, the transition from being a player to customer service to design. Um, uh, it's it's always interesting to see smaller companies where the people all know the game, or they came in because they were playing the game, sort of at that early stage. And then as the companies get bigger and you hire more and more people from the outside that really don't have the same attachment to the game, it feels like if they don't come in and immediately just sort of immerse themselves in the game, you'll start to see what you're describing a lot. And I've seen that at a few companies now. And um, it's difficult because a lot of times when you're hiring in people and they're professionals that have been in the industry 15 years or whatever, and you're hiring them for their talent, and they've got families and they can't spend a few hours a day playing. It's it's weird because there's no way to necessarily force someone to become passionate about the project.
Right. Well, yeah, there was it's clearly I know they wouldn't have the time to play the game. I say they should be able to run through it.
Yeah,
Like
that's
there
fair.
should have been some run throughs of EverQuest, the dungeons, no population, just to look at the dungeons and try and get them. We used to map them out and try and explain it to them, but it just wouldn't happen. Um, and then you also need to get the feel for, um, like some of them are just amazing artists, but
Mhm.
um, if you don't, you need to know the game you're working on, because there would be times where a lot of corridors would be too narrow. Um, there'd be a lot of art that I think we didn't use because it was too narrow. Um, and it was just you need the space for a party, for their effects that they're going to be playing, and for their oversized um, mobs that they're going to be fighting. So
Mhm.
um, I think a lot of that was not taken into consideration until after they were already starting to work on some of the world, and then would get stuck with something that just wasn't going to work. I remember one was Nectropo's castle, and I was so upset because it was like, damn it, um, I really wanted that thing to be badass. Although the artist on it was awesome, which was Kelsey, who's now a
Mhm. Yeah.
brewmeister, but because it was so there were a lot of it was really confining. And you know how it is when you play MMOs, your environments need to be a little bit larger than realism, because there's so much it has to handle for the experience as
Mhm.
a player in a full party. Um, uh, there was there were a lot of zones that were just too they were just not perfect for the experience of MMO party, and as well as not having um, not not the familiarity from their what they're supposed to be representing in EverQuest.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I know a lot of people love, like when we've talked in the past, Nick Tropos has come up a good bit as like being one that is yeah, is aesthetically pleasing. But the point that you're making, it's interesting because I think maybe we went the opposite with that in EQ over time. We wound up making things a little too big too consistently, and then we missed that sort of lower Gawk or all of Gawk and old school dungeon feel where that bit of confinement was also nice.
Right.
Um,
Yeah, I can see that. I mean, you guys kept going up because it's like you went after the gods, and then everything is like ramping up. And then there was a lot of like where mobs that got more powerful got larger in scale, so everything was getting bigger.
Yeah. And
But
the character artists always got pissed when we
I
just
think
kept
we all
scaling
make
things up.
our come on, the tool set allows us to do that. I mean, I'm sure you guys did too, but one of the things, that we had, that the unsung hero for EverQuest 2 was the tools, because the tools were just amazing. And it's like, if you're a tools programmer, I mean, you're an unsung hero, because
For sure.
um, that enabled people to create things fast and to keep uh, developers from creating too many bugs by creating their own scripts and stuff. Even though you still had the script, it wasn't that much. If it wasn't for the tool sets, were just beyond superior in EverQuest 2. So if I was ever on another game again, I would definitely want to make sure that they invest a lot into the tool set, because especially if it's an MMO, because you have so much content that you have to create. But I
Yeah.
can't even see MMOs being created because anymore, because they're too costly now. They cost too much when a company can make their money by doing far less. So I don't know where the genre is actually going to go now.
Um, I think, and this is completely self-serving, but it's our belief that we'll probably see. Well, we already saw. I don't know if you saw the announcement. There's a game coming out called Palia. I think I'm pronouncing it correctly, and it's really embracing more the sense of place. I think we're going to see more varied MMOs, um, and they probably won't look as much like the current batch as others. And I think we're going to see more and more indie, smaller scale MMOs coming up. And at some point, if any if they figure out exactly what the hell they mean, all these companies that are dumping hundreds of millions of dollars into making the metaverse, we'll eventually see where I think these more varied experiences will start to finally be pulled together. But I mean, when we say MMO, I think a lot of times people are describing the big blockbuster, the big budget, the WoWs and the AOCs and the ESOs and all of those things. Yeah, those are high risk, and I think we'll continue to see shit like that come out. But I also think, given how good the tools are and how passionate people are about MMOs, there's a lot of really cool indie stuff coming up. There's ours, naturally, which is badass. But there's also we just played like 4 hours of EverCraft Online. So if you go to evercraftonline.com, check that out. It's very it's got the simpler voxel based art, but just very traditional and still hardcore and kills the shit out of you. And it's great. It's a ton of fun. And so I think there's a lot of those experiences we'll see coming up. So
Right.
there is
Well, the traditional ones that we were on are probably too much of a beast for most people. Like Pantheon. Pantheon's trying. I wish them all the best, but it's such a beast that they have to handle, that that team, because when you got like a huge world where you're trying to create a traditional MMORPG, like
right.
an EverQuest, um, or World of Warcraft. It's like there's so much that has to go into that world. And look at the armies that we worked with to try and create those worlds, and a lot of times we were behind the gun most of the time. Um, it's just, I wish them all the best, but I know they got a lot to handle there.
Yeah, it's definitely a challenge. Oh, and I think I misspoke. Thank you, Timmy, for linking it. It's evercraftonline.com. But now there's a link in chat. Yeah, man. So there are a couple questions. We missed one that was a good one, and you hit on a little bit. But the question was, when you're writing lore, how do you determine how much to share to players? Were there ever times during EQ's development where you left things open-ended because the story hadn't been worked out yet?
Yeah, a lot of times initially it would be a one there'd be one pass that poses mysteries. Most mysteries never are answered if they're really big. Um, and then if you need to get into them later, go ahead and try and create around that.
Mm,
Um, a lot of the EverQuest stuff, the huge things were mysteries that didn't have an answer until we actually needed to answer them
right. Yeah.
for maybe a project or something. Um, down the road, I like to give I I started to want to have answers for a lot of smaller things. So by the time I was in Kunark or EverQuest 2, I want I'll create something that I know I'm going to use later. I would create more like a web of lore, and since I'm pretty much kept like a record of everything, I always had something I could hook into later on. Like if I'm working on something else later on, and then I'm working on this character, I can say, "Oh yeah, you know what? I already have this connection over here. I'll link them together."
Right.
Um, and then try and build off that if I want to. And then sometimes players will find those connections, and for them they'll think it's cool that they said, "Wait, this is weird. Why does this and this go together?" I think things like that make it fun as a player to try and find, even if it's not like right in your face. I mean, as a player, I always liked finding stuff like that. So
Did you steal any
I
of
also
the
didn't
ideas
want
that
it to
players
end.
had?
So I used to
Sorry,
no.
I was about to say
I
because
think a lot of them probably.
go ahead.
Oh, I was gonna say one thing I did do though was I always kept, for me personally, especially on EverQuest 2, I kept an eye on the lore forum, because for me, the people on the lore forums, I thought, wow, they're really into the lore. I wanted, I enjoyed reading everything they had to say, and sometimes they would come to con- conclusions about things, or think there was something that had that ended in something significant and there really wasn't. Sometimes
Mhm.
I would end up down the road creating something significant so it wasn't a dead end for them.
Okay.
But I liked that they were into the lore, so I thought it was cool that if I could help them along, uh, I would.
Yeah.
But as far as ideas, no. But if they were headed in a direction that was a dead end, and I saw there'd be times where people put a lot of thought into some things. If it's too detailed, definitely not. But if it was something not too significant lore wise, I'd connect something to them so they feel like something, their whole all the work they did and did have something connected to it.
I think
Um,
that's a better way of
but I
describing
always
what I
that's
meant by
when
the
I ended up
question.
when I got. Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, yeah,
Go
yeah.
ahead. What
No,
did you mean by
no,
it?
but that's basically it. But what I blurted out was, "Did you ever steal anything from the players?" But essentially, what you just described of like, because we read forums all the time, and they'd start down this path, and it's like, actually, that's a good point. That needs to that if we link that up, that's going to be kind of badass. And then people would be like, "Oh my god, they've been plotting this for 3 years," and we're like, "There's definitely no plan," But it made sense the direction they were going in.
Right. Kind of like Lost, the TV program. It had no. Although they never paid attention to their viewers. But yeah, I used to love for me, the forums were great because all those people on there were they were EQ lovers, and because there were some people who were into the lore, and then there's some people who don't care. They're just after rewards, or they're just like beating stuff down and going after, um, uh, anything other than lore wasn't that important. But
Mm.
some people who are into it, that was my thing, that was my department, so I definitely wanted to be there for them. And I would jump on the lore boards all the time and interact with them too. There are friends that I have now close these days that uh, are that I know strictly from the lore boards, and some of them I worked on a few projects too with after the fact after I left EverQuest. Um, but I've always respected people who love the lore. But like, I expect people who are like, say you worked on combat. I mean, you're going to be you should be looking at the forums on that to see what they're saying and see if you're missing something that maybe you should know about. You know.
Yeah. So I'm curious. During that period, like when EQ first went live, there are a number of things that we see where the players basically took things, maybe in they took it upon themselves. Like if you look at trading in the EC tunnel, or they looked at certain mechanics and it was like, was this intended? Things like pain pulling and things like that. How much discussion was there of that when it first, when the game went live and you started seeing that?
Well, in EQ, that wasn't no. Those were like definitely unexpected. Um, and then eventually, as you can see, it starts to get it. I think it's like with the tunnels, East Common tunnels, and all that. I think that's cool when that comes together and emergent gameplay comes together, and it just happens. The players get together, or when they start having language fairs to exchange languages. I mean, that was that's just like incredible, um, and it seems weird when you want to devote time to creating a zone that maybe is for trading, and then it's still not as great as people just finding their own niches in the world to say, all right, everybody, let's come out here and do whatever, or exchange this, or like they're creating their own footprint in the world.
Yeah.
But emergent gameplay was a lot of that happened, especially with EverQuest, because it's like um, we didn't know what to expect. Pretty much, a lot of us. Uh, I know I wasn't into anything like Meridian or anything like that before that, or I
Mm.
didn't have a lot of time on Ultima Online or anything like that. So I didn't know what to expect, what was going to happen, and a lot of people are the same. How are people going to react to the world, and how are they going to use the world? But you definitely got to keep an eye on that, and as soon as you see it happening, um, support them in any way.
Yeah.
Although I don't know if in the case of like in the Common Lands tunnel trading, I don't know if the biggest thing, the greatest thing was to. I was never really sure about something like the bazaar, because
Mm.
the only experience I've ever heard of with the bazaar is it's like a slideshow, and like I avoided that place just for that.
Yeah.
I would rather like create maybe some places in the world where, in that case, where people might where you might be able to they might be able to congregate, or even better, making sure you have the systems there that allow them to do what they want to do better, not maybe creating the zone for them, but maybe making systems for them to do what they want to do better.
Yeah, we've been talking about that a lot lately, and yeah, I agree. Um, so I'm curious, like the how long were you on EQ2? Because EQ2 for me was kind of a black box. I never had the time to really dig in, and to be honest, it just didn't seem like there's, at least at my level, there wasn't a ton of communication between teams and stuff like that. So, how long were you there?
So let's see. The last thing I did was the last ever EQ2 that came out. The expansion pack that came out was the Shadow Odyssey, and then after the Shadow Odyssey, I started to work on the next one, which kind of sucked because I was upset that um, I loved working on EQ2 at that point because we had so much freedom. I wouldn't have left if not for the opportunity. But because I was, especially because the last thing I was working on was for the next expansion. I was working on something called, if you're familiar with Nectropos and all that, they're one of the lore that I was started to really get into and I started crafting around was something about Lord Everling, who used to own Nectropos. But anyways, I was creating this kind of like cursed curios, like you see in a lot of shows, but it's like this little curio shop where everything's cursed. Um,
Oh, right.
Kind of like that kind of shop where you can buy stuff or find quests to things you wouldn't be able to find anywhere else. But anyways, this shop was going to appear anywhere in the world for a given amount of time. Like its doorway would appear in alleyways or wherever. It could be anywhere really, but and they would stay there for an amount of time. But that was the last thing I was working on, and then I left during that time, so that never came out. And I was so bummed because I really wanted to do that. Um, but the opportunity to work on Defiance was too big that I was like, "Oh man, I got to go do this to have a chance to work on a TV series.
Mm.
That would be sweet." So I went, and that's when I left.
Yeah, it's funny when you mention that. I totally forgot about the old Friday the 13th TV show that had nothing to do with Jason. It was a curio
Yeah,
shop.
exactly. Because every episode was right.
Mm.
Every episode was about one of the objects in that place.
Hmm. Very cool. So, what was the vibe like? You went from like that really wild, but kind of, well, not kind of, very special period in Sony's evolution, and then you worked on Defiance, and I'm assuming bit different vibe. I mean,
It was different because we had to interact with Hollywood,
yeah.
and that's weird because it changes the game you're making with when you're trying to do something with them. The way of making games is totally different from Hollywood, and that was something we learned because most of their work comes at the back end and
Mhm.
ours comes in pre-production. Like we have to know what we're doing, even with, especially with art and the look and feel of the whole thing is that all comes early on, so we know what we're doing. But theirs is in the back. It's like they create a show like in the last whatever 6 months leading up to the damn thing. That's when they finally know what they want.
Mhm.
Um, so trying to get anything done working with that was tough, and that's kind of sad because I think initially when I first went on the project, um, Bill Trost had some really great ideas that of the game that they were going to make, and it sounded so cool. It was almost more like I don't know, most people won't like it, but it was almost like Marvel Ultimate Alliance. Um, but it was like it was you could be up against a lot of the enemy and stuff would be like aliens
Mm.
and their AI would be amazing. Like all these different aliens would have just like this wild um, AI that because the whole Earth would be have just tons of aliens that and not just like intelligent humanoid aliens, but anything. So you would have this plethora of things that you could be fighting depending on what environment you're in with your little group. Um, and everything was going to be put into the AI of that. But trying to work with Hollywood, it turned out to be different because it's like, we can't do that. We can't have all these things. We don't have a budget for this or that.
I was about to say, it sounds
Or there were
expensive.
just times where they couldn't answer things. Just and for the whole and not that that's a bad it's not bad for them, but it's just that that's something they decided that's things we need up front are things they don't need till the end end of the project. So
Mm.
it's like it was a marriage between that should have never happened really. It could have, I guess, but it wasn't nobody was willing to really put a lot into getting it to work together. Because I think it was sold on the prospect of a cohesive project where players would be able to see things in the TV show and affect it would affect the game world and see it in the TV show. It's like you could do it, but you would both have to really commit to it, and that means committing a lot of money on both ends, and then
Mhm.
also really making a timeline that everybody sticks to, and that wasn't gonna it wasn't gonna happen, especially with a brand new IP.
Yeah, it's a big challenge. So I didn't realize that.
Anyways, though, it was horrible.
I didn't realize that Bill was part of that as well. So the and hopefully, yeah, I'll just ask the questions because I have no idea. So you and Bill, you guys were on EQ2 when I basically the way I got my job was, I just got picked up and then everybody left and went to Sigil, right? So it's like all of the crew, with the exception of a couple of people on the design side, were all apprentices in Luckland, and then next thing you know, we've got to make planes of power, right? And so it's because everybody went and was at Sigil. So then uh it sounds like you and Trost, you were working on Defiance after EQ2, and then you eventually linked back up with Brad and those guys on Pantheon. Um, like, was that just sort of a thing where because you knew each other, or
Well, the whole Defiance thing just fell in there because that was like they closed down the whole studio in San Diego, and so here I am in San Diego without a job. So it's like, all right, what am I gonna do? Yeah, and
Mhm.
filling out, uh, creating resumes and applying for jobs. And a lot of times, I think coming off of what we were working on and our jobs, it was like I wasn't at the point yet where I'm had to like really humble myself and say, oh well, I'm starting from the bottom up. So I just want to and I think Brad was in the same vein where we just need to get into something where we're building the same type of games that we're used to. Anyways, I heard that he was creating Pantheon, and I got in touch with him and to see what it was, and he said, "Hey, come out and we'll have lunch, and I'll tell you all about it." Because he wanted me on there because by that time I was known as the EQ lore guru, so he wanted to bring me on board because he knew the community knew me.
Mm.
Um, so he wanted to bring me on to work on lore for his project, and so we had lunch. And I wasn't really thinking I was going to do it because when it comes to games, in EverQuest, Brad's camp and my camp were two different types of players, and we always didn't see eye to eye. That's one thing why I wouldn't have went to like Sigil at the
Mm,
time.
okay.
Um, but after talking to him, it sounded great, and I would have a lot of input into it, and it would also, and for the most part, it would also be like, um, I just love creating, so I want to get back into that realm. But it was going to be one of those things where, since it's a brand new project, we don't have funding or anything. You know, what's going to be times are going to be tough because we're not going to have. It's not like we're getting paid,
Right.
but we're doing what we love, and so we started into that. And I got a couple other people that I know into their like um, Vu and
Mm-hmm.
Mac. You know Mac.
Yep.
Um, Matter of fact, me and Mac work really well together on that. I think we worked harder than anybody on that project for for a long time. Um, we still always talk about that, but that's how I ended up on Pantheon, and things were going good there. But I don't want to get into the whole thing because Brad's passed on, but there was just some money things that were not jiving, so it would just seem better that we just a lot of the original people just left because we had to like support our families and it
Mm.
wasn't going to happen. And I was at that time, you probably understand this, trying to pay for insurance out here on your own was just like it was. I was getting in debt, so I'm like, I need to go find a regular job
Yeah,
and keep this other stuff freelance. And and that's what I ended up doing because I had to leave Pantheon because at one point the money wasn't going to happen and I had a family to support. So I had to go do something that I knew, especially more than anything, that had health insurance because that's just way too expensive. And that's what I ended up doing. So, and like right now, my main job is, of all things, I'm, of all things, I'm a meat cutter, but that's because I got a job that needed that had amazing benefits. I had to humble myself for that because I'm like, why am I going to do this? But eventually, it turned out pretty cool. I'm 10 minutes from work, and then I was also freelancing, writing, and then
mm-hmm.
like the carbonation toys thing, which me and Mac worked on together, doing stuff on the side to keep the creativity going. Um, and now it's just a matter of now it's like my unfortunately my dad passed on like 2.5 months ago from COVID, but he had like a lot of businesses, so that was one of the reasons I didn't move out of here, like go to Sweden or anything for a job, because my family has a lot of roots here and they have
Mm.
businesses here. So, and I'm almost finished paying my house off. So it was a matter of there's way so much here that I'm responsibilities that I know I'm going to have. And then my dad passed on, and now I have to look after those businesses also right now. So, I mean, I don't have to do meat cutting, but I know I kind of like it, and it keeps me busy. And I don't, because if I think if I didn't have a regular job, I probably would be sitting behind a keyboard getting way too fat, and I gotta watch that. But um, this will probably be the last year I'm going to be meat cutting though, because the stuff with my dad looking after his businesses, which is like commercial property in like Carlsbad. I don't know if you remember Carlsbad,
Yeah, I
but
do.
um, it's like right smack in the middle of Carlsbad, where like it's like prime property on prime in the prime center of town. So it's like a gold mine. I didn't think I would be um, having to look after now. So it's like it's tough. But the sad thing is I'm dying to get into some creativity again. So, you know, and on the side, I've been working on my own worlds and things.
Hmm.
But it's like I really got to get onto another project because it's like you know how the buzz how it is. It's in your blood now. You just gotta. We've worked so long in the industry that it's just like you crave it so much now. And to be away from it, now it's just been too long. I just need to find something to do. So now I guess that's why I say I'll probably just forget meat cutting soon and try and look for something, even a side project, small, tiny project,
Right.
and just something where I can get out. I know I once, I'm sorry I'm going on and on, but there
No,
was
not
this
at all.
one project I was working on Mac with because we were going to make small little apps. And I had this one project that I've been writing on, like, oh, it was my one of my dream apps. It's so stupid. I used to love this game when I was young because I'm old. It was on the NES and it was called Iron Tank. So I'm like, oh, I want to make a game like that. And when I was talking to Mac about that, and we were all of a sudden I said, oh, and let's throw zombies in there too. So all of a sudden, like there was this game we came up with called uh oh, what was it? Oh, it was called Dead Leopard, but it had the Def Leppard logo on it because it was gonna have like heavy metal style tunes going on in the background. But it was mostly tanks versus zombies. I know that sounds funny, but we were working it out. Uh, but working on small projects like that or things like that would be even that anything would be cool. So I want to get back into doing that stuff. So I'm probably gonna start doing that now that I can again, even if it's on my own.
Cool,
But if you
man.
know anybody who needs help, here I am.
Yeah, you know what? I might, and I occasionally run into those situations, so I'll definitely be following up with you on that. Yeah, I'm sorry to hear about your dad passing. And the when you first mentioned like going into meat cutting, it's interesting. Well, first of all, the first question I had was, had you ever done it before, or did you just like did you learn it and then go from there? But then my other thing that I was thinking is, um, it's weird, man. Like that was a big stressor as a game designer. I think people think you can just sometimes automatically plug into a new job, which if you're able to move all over the place, it's not as hard. But I was looking around San Diego area when I was there, and that was one of the reasons why when I got recruited to go to the Austin studio, I was like, well, there's more MMO companies, there's more games out here. I think sort of per capita, it'd be easier to find another job. But even there, that's why I went into production. I was like, it's 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 not as easy as I think people think, and it's definitely very stressful. So, had you done meat cutting before? I guess is the question.
No, I haven't. And initially, I went into when I took the job, it was like so for me, it was like so humbling because it wasn't even me cutting at the time. At the time I went in, it was like a freight variety, but it was like I reached a point where I got in debt with paying my own insurance so much that I needed to get something because I needed to start paying this off
Hmm.
and get health insurance. So I took this job for like a variety freight, but early on they wanted me to help out on the meat department, and then a little after that they're like, "Hey, why don't you? There's an opening for meat cutting. We can train you and stuff." So I took it up, and I've been doing that for like I think 4 years now. And
Hmm.
now I know a lot, and a lot of it has to do with I had to like train myself because amazingly, I thought they were going to teach me a lot about meat, but then it was to the point where I had to do it myself. But now I mean, now I love it because I loved learning about, I like learning about anything new. So it was the same thing. I was amazed with different cuts and how to treat them and everything like that. And I like eating. So now I know a lot more about eating.
That's
So
that's where my brain went
and that's
immediately.
the good thing about it was also a trade.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I
Like
mean,
I gotta buy a smoker so I can like get big slabs of brisket.
absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I'm a huge fan of eating meat, and as you mentioned, though, it is having a trade like that.
Don't
If the
that
solar
snippet
flare
or
ever comes, then
that
you're in
sounds
business.
snippet does not sound good.
They'll be clipping it. Um, so the, I guess the question I have, because we're coming up on 2 hours. You're kind enough to say at least one. So um, at the onset, the question I have is there any content that you wish you would have put in back when you're on EQ? Is there anything that like sort of has stuck with you where if you could go back and either complete something or add it that you had on your list, or does anything sort of come to mind?
Not really. I mean, there's a lot of stuff other than the last thing I was working on because I really got into this Everling lore towards the end, and I really wanted to see that place put in that I
Mm.
never got to put in. Other than that, I mean, maybe some more Mayong stuff. I really wanted to get into that too, but I don't think there is because I think the beyond me, I mean, the developers who work on it, no matter who they are, they all love the project. So, um, if there's something that I never put in, I just like to see the game world go on. That's why
Mm.
it's sad to think that EverQuest is where it is because it should be so much more now. And I hope that it ends up. I'm gonna be. I want to see it still grow and become great again. So I hope something happens to the property where it can find a. I think it still needs to find a home and a project where it can live again. Um, I think it's just surviving. Like it's kind of a coincidence that it's surviving, just like the rest of us devs who left Sony. It's like the project itself left Sony and it's just surviving, also hoping to get back up on its feet again.
Yeah, I mean, with their recent acquisition by EG7, I'm very curious to see how that goes, because it's either going to be a situation where you've got one of these bigger companies that just owns a bunch of properties, and then um, they don't do anything with it, or it could really wind up being a situation where because the CEOs and former EQ player, because at least one other person that I talked to there, also, big MMO person, understands and has played EQ. It would be cool to see them take the capabilities that they have in like their portfolio of companies and do something really cool with EverQuest. I think the potential's there. I'm hopeful for the EQ fans. But I tend to just be kind of optimistic in general as I talk to people that are working on other things and look at some of what's out there. I'm hoping there's a lot of cool stuff coming out. We'll see, but it's a challenge for everybody working on one of these things.
Yeah, and they've got some really good people who love the project itself. So I mean, I know they're taking good care of it. So um, I don't think we've seen the last of EverQuest, but I just hope it takes the right turn whenever whatever incarnation it comes out next.
Oh, and you're speaking more in terms of like the IP itself, like what future product, not
Oh yeah,
necessarily the
the
existing
IP.
one. Yeah, cool. Um, Folks in chat, you've been asking questions. I've tried to hit them as we go. But I'm curious, are there any other big questions left that you've got? I want to make sure that Tony's able to get out while the weather is still good.
It's California. The weather's always good.
I'm sorry, man. I've been living in Europe for the last like 5.5 years. So you're like, oh, it's a really nice day today. I'm
You're
like,
in what?
I'm in Germany.
Are you in Germany?
Yeah, I was in Sweden for 3 years before this, and then Germany for 2 years before that.
Oh, stay there. Stay there for Oktoberfest, and I'll come and visit you. I've never been to an Oktoberfest in Germany.
Yeah, dude, if they lift all the lockdowns, it should be a pretty good Oktoberfest. And I tell you what, keep in touch. We'll definitely talk about that one. Couple questions in
Oh
chat.
yeah, and I'm definitely gonna talk to Kevin Burns this week about coming on.
That would be so sick. All right, question for you. What's the best 80s rock band?
That's such a huge question. I mean, if you're talking about really big metal, I mean, heavy metal, I would have to say Iron Maiden. Um, I have my personal favorites. So, one band that I really love from the 80s, I don't like their current thing, but, and people laugh at me for this, is Autograph. I love Autograph. And of course, Def Leppard and Judas Priest. But I love all of that stuff. I'm still waiting for new bands to come out now that, one band, if you like, oh, look at that. Damn trash day. One band that I think if you guys like 80s metal, especially like Iron Maiden, that if you've never heard that I just found is a band called Riot City. They have one album that just came out 1 or 2 years ago. Check it out. It's freaking awesome. I'm totally into it.
Right on. Wait a second. Let me open another tab. Right. City. I always have to do this so I don't forget stuff. I'm getting old. All right. So another quick question. Let's see. What was
Oh,
about
by the
Miss
way,
Moore that you wanted to
I would
explore?
say Van Halen, but they're above everybody else.
Yeah, it's not even okay. So what was it about Miss Moore that you wanted to explore further?
Oh, his origins.
Origins.
I was working all that out, but it's probably sitting in that digital tome somewhere. If that, I guarantee that's probably all gone and erased anyways. But it was mostly his origins.
Right on. And let's see. Droop asked, was there anything you ever wanted to implement or change that you never got to in EverQuest? We just did that one, buddy. And all right, so one more. What do you think modern MMOs can learn from EverQuest?
I think probably respecting the world, and probably because, especially when it comes to travel, because I've one thing I learned from EverQuest, especially early on, was that having an expansive world, and when it's tough to traverse, it's like that's part of the magic. I know it's hard, but it's really some things. I guess with EverQuest, some what they need to learn is some things. Not everything's meant to be made easier.
Right.
Some of those things that are hard actually become part of your, even though you hate them, they're actually part of your experience, that overall you love the whole thing and you love the world. I think something along those lines was like uh, um, retrieving your corpse runs, because I used to hate corpse runs. I used to argue with Brad about corpse runs, but now that I look back, I think there are times when I've had some really good times with my party when we had to go back and do a corpse run.
For sure.
But I guess not everything is intended to be made easier.
Yeah. Cool, man. No, I agree. It's a constant conversation. A lot of people agree with you on those points. It comes up on the stream pretty regularly. Um, yeah. So I tell you what. I've bugged Kevin, and you can mention that I said that I've bugged him. Um, and but I know he's busy as well. But I've bugged Kevin. If you bug him for me, and if we could get the two of you on there, that'd be pretty fantastic. I I know he's got a lot of insight that people would look forward to hearing about, and I'm fascinated by the zone work. Like I've already talked to him a bunch offline about the zones that he worked on and just the style. And I mean, a lot of the zones that stick out in our minds, like the old Freeport and all that stuff. I know he worked on. It's just fantastic. So if you're able to do that, I'd be hugely thankful. And uh, yeah, man, like I really appreciate you coming on the stream. And I tell you what, like if you get done here today, and think of other stuff, or you dig up something in lore, some of your notes, or anything like that, you want to hop back on, let me know. And it doesn't have to be 2 hours like this time, even if it's for 30 minutes or an hour, something like that. Please let me know and hit us up in Discord as well. And I say that because I'm anytime I'm doing like a thing where I've got to pop on an interview or whatever, like I'm always like, as soon as I'm done, I'm like, man, I wish I would have thought of this, that, the other thing or whatever. So yeah, dude, I'm glad we had a chance to talk to you, and hopefully this is the first of several discussions.
Oh yeah, for sure. And like I said, I'll talk to Kevin this week and see if anybody else would want to come on.
That would be amazing. Yeah. I don't know who all you talk to, but I'd love to have any and all those folks on. I've pinged some people, but a lot of times, like I'm just sending random LinkedIn messages or hitting some people that I'm actually connected to on Facebook up, and I got the feeling they're like, "What the hell?" So, yeah, dude, if you'd be willing to do that, it would be massive, and I appreciate it. Um,
Sure.
cool. And on that note, what I'll do
All
is
right, man.
wrap
It's
up
time for the
here.
poll.
Yep, you
And
have fun at the
thanks to
pool.
everybody out there too. I'm glad there are people who love EQ still.
They absolutely do. Cool, dude. Talk to you soon.